In professional sports, a franchise player is an athlete who is not simply the best player on their team, but one that the team can build their franchise around for the foreseeable future.
Welcome into a brand new edition of Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson. You can catch us every Thursday afternoon on the Tobacco Road Sports Radio YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Usually loaded with guests and news from around North Carolina sports scene. You can hear it on the terrestrial radio stations in the Triad on Friday afternoons, WWBG 1470 AM. At 5 p.m. on Fridays. If you missed it there, you can catch it on WTOB 980 AM, 96.7 FM at 6 p.m. in Winston-Salem. Loaded show today from the All Hornets Sports Illustrated crew. Matt Alquiza and Sam Dracula will stop by. We'll talk a little NBA playoffs and what they think the Hornets should do with the sixth pick of the draft. And, of course, it's sports buffet time. David Glenn will stop by with us here and finish up the show, and we'll talk a little bit about the Negro Leagues getting added to the Major League Baseball, pro baseball statistics. Before we get to all that, though, it is College World Series time, and the state of North Carolina has 7 schools in the College World Series. So who better to bring on than the host of ACC Baseball Etc. He is the play-by-play guy for USA Baseball and friend of the program, Daron Vaught in the house. What's going on, Daron?
D-Man, I always appreciate the invite. Happy to talk college baseball. It's sort of that sports time of the year. You know, I love the sport, so I'm glad to chop it up with you for a little bit.
So 2 things. We were talking before we got on the air. I don't know. I never plan it this way, but whenever I do have you on, usually I have David Glenn on somewhere later on in the show too. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Daron was DG's producer out in Raleigh. And then 2, I wouldn't say I have a love-hate relationship with college baseball. It's more along the lines of I don't get into it until we get near the College World Series. And even then, it's usually me being a Carolina fan, I'll kind of pick up from there and kind of see, can they get to Omaha or whatnot. And I have been to Omaha before on a business trip. And I always tell people that Omaha, there's no trees. Everything is flat. Like literally, there's no hills. Everything is flat. And when you get off the plane, it smells like steak. Like it literally smells like beef, like wafting through the air, like when you get there. And we actually drove by the facility where all these teams are going to eventually meet up in Omaha for the College World Series. What I wanted to do was kind of play College World Series for dummies. So if you're coming into this late and you know that you've got a school that you want to root for, and you've kind of been following the stories from the sideline, but you haven't really got a chance to really watch these teams. I wanted Daron to kind of give us a player to watch from each one. And I want to start off with the highest ranked seed in the state of North Carolina, and that would be the University of North Carolina, the Tar Heels. They have the highest national seed among all the local schools at 4, and they'll be hosting a regional with national champion LSU, Wofford, and Long Island. Give us a player to watch for UNC, Daron.
Yeah, I think this one's obvious. They've got plenty of talent besides their star power, but you might have heard of a guy named Vance Honeycutt who hits home runs. He steals bases. He actually is the new career home run leader for North Carolina's program, which was a record a guy named Devy Bell, who played in the late 80s, held. So it's a record that stood for nearly 40 years. And Honeycutt earlier this season hit the record-setting home run to be the new home run king in Tar Heels history. But Des, dude, this is a lineup that is really dynamic, top to bottom. They can hit home runs. They can play some small ball if they need it. It's a team with some very good bunters, which doesn't seem like in the year 2024 is a necessary thing for a team, but it works out really well for them. They can move runners over. They've got guys who hit for average. They just do it all in the lineup. And, the rotation for their pitching has come along really well considering the circumstances. They lost their Friday ace 2 weeks before the season started. So they had to shift 2 true freshmen into their top 2 starting pitcher roles. One of those freshmen, who was the Friday guy, got hurt and missed the end of the season. So now they're rolling with basically they've lost their top starter twice over this season. And a true freshman, Jason DeCaro, has come in and assumed that top pitching spot, and he's done really well. He's actually second team All ACC as the youngest player in all of Division I college baseball. He didn't turn 18 until just a few weeks ago. So big shoes to fill for him. So Vance Honeycutt, Jason DeCaro would be my two if I can do that for the Heels.
Okay, and that's the Chapel Hill Regional. So UNC was the highest nationally ranked team in the state of North Carolina. If I move down to Clemson, their ACC rival, they're hosting a regional. They've got two North Carolina teams in their regional, Coastal Carolina and High Point. I was just actually at High Point's campus last week. That is a beautiful campus. They've done so much over there building up that university. Give me a player from Coastal Carolina and a player from High Point to look out for, because of course they're going to eventually cross paths with Clemson in this regional.
Yeah, Coastal's interesting, man. They've got can I give the head coach as maybe the key player? Gary Gilmore is a legend there, has brought that program to new heights. Obviously, the national championship in recent memory has kind of elevated that program to be, okay, this is a baseball school. And he's on his way out. He announced prior to the season starting, he would be retiring at the end of the year. So any game that they play from this point on, the Chanticleers, they're just extending the life of the Gary Gilmore as their head coach, which is pretty cool. They've got some impressive players. Caden Bodine's a catcher for them that's fun to watch for sure. For High Point, this is a team I saw in the Big South Championship last week, and they won it. It was played in High Point, but not at High Point. It was at the High Point Rockers place, Truist Field, which is a really nice setting for that sort of environment.
It really
High Point went in as one of 3 of the 4 teams that I really thought had a chance to win the Big South. It was kind of wide open. But they've got some guys. Eric Grentz, who's a former North Carolina Tar Heel, is a great story. He won the MVP or most outstanding player, however they designate it, for the Big South tournament. And he, was a catcher at North Carolina, was not an everyday starter, transferred as a graduate to go to High Point. The cool thing is he's got a twin brother who was pitching at Tulane, graduated. And, with the COVID year, everybody's got this extra year just kind of hanging on. Adam Grentz, twin brother of Eric Grentz, also transferred for a graduate year at High Point. And they're a battery. Adam's a pitcher, Eric a catcher. So the first round game that I did last week for them, they got to close it out together. It was Adam throwing to Eric. And it was cool, on our ESPN Plus broadcast, it was like, imagine how often throughout their life, like they have just simply thrown with one another, right? The advantage over anybody that you're playing with, right? I mean, they've been doing it since they were presumably old enough and big enough to throw a baseball.
Because they probably could do signals with their eyes instead of or just mentally they could do
a really cool story. So they got to close it out the first day, and then Grentz, who homered in that first game, hit a walk-off grand slam to win another game in the semifinals for High Point. So I'm going to go with Eric Grentz. He's one of the leaders on what is a really, really fun High Point team.
Host of ACC Baseball Etc Podcast and the USA Baseball play-by-play guy, Daron Vaught, in the house talking College World Series. It's going to get kicked off this weekend. 7 North Carolina schools made it to the College World Series, some of them hosting. One of the schools that a lot of people thought should host and is not going to host is Duke. They are the 2 seed in the Norman Regional, hosted by Oklahoma. My understanding is that Duke didn't get this because of the size of their facility. Their facility only seats like 2,000 people, and it's not really big enough to accommodate a College World Series regional. That's really the main reason why they didn't get one. Is that pretty accurate to say?
I think it's fair to speculate, right? It's tough to say because the committee's never going to admit that. But I think it's fair to say, because if you look at the field, East Carolina got in at number 16, and that's an environment that I think even casual observers know is raucous. They pack it out. People love the Pirates in that area. So if you are thinking in terms of what's going to be an amenable host for an event like this with 3 other teams, 4 total in the vicinity, we've seen Clark LeClaire Stadium in Greenville do this before. We hadn't really seen it done in Durham. at a park where it's creeping up on 100 years old. It is due for renovations as part of Chris Pollard, their head coach at Duke, not being pulled away by another program in the offseason. Administration guaranteed renovations to Jack Coombs Field, which is what it is right there in the midst of everything on campus with Cameron Indoor, Wallace Wade. So the potential is there for it to be a really good environment, Des. It's just not up to snuff in terms of the facility and having like a dedicated restroom that's large enough for a crowd that a regional would draw. Things like that are of concern. So again, I think it's fair to speculate that came into consideration for Duke.
I want to say, didn't a similar situation happen with ECU like a few years back, and then they ended up just building a bigger facility, and now they're hosting regionals for the most part? Because I want to say they had to play in Wilson or something like that a couple years ago.
So ECU even had a year where they played the regional in Wilson, and then when they made it to the super regionals, they played it in Kenston. So in the same year, they had two different home fields, using my air quotes, for postseason play. And then they built Clark LeClaire Stadium, and it's known as one of the best environments in the entire country in college baseball. So I think we're just there's a point of some growing pains for Duke baseball as a program. Now that the success is there under Chris Pollard over the past dozen years or so, it's just sort of like the progressive growth. The facility's going to come.
Speaking of ACC schools, we'll circle back. Well, let's just stay in Greenville. East Carolina hosting a regional there, like we were just talking about. Wake Forest is the 2 seed. Wake Forest made it all the way to the College World Series last year, falling to LSU. Give us a player from this Wake Forest team that we should keep an eye on. I actually saw this Wake Forest team versus A&T earlier this year in Greensboro. It was early in the year, like back in March or whatever. So, I mean, it was super early. And I know that we've had a whole long season since then. Give us a player from Wake Forest that we should keep an eye on as we start this journey.
Yeah, if you watched the ACC tournament last week, this is going to come as no surprise because he started in that 12-inning thriller with North Carolina, and he tossed 6 innings and struck out 15. Chase Burns is the guy to watch for them. They'll likely start him on day 2 if they can get a first-round victory and go to the winner's bracket. It would set up well for a matchup against probably East Carolina on day 2, and they throw Chase Burns, who's projected to be like a top 5. I mean, he's 6th or 7th at worst draft pick overall. Man, he that Friday night last game of pool play in Charlotte last week, it was Wake Forest, North Carolina. We could all see the writing on the wall. It was going to be for a spot in the semifinals.
Yeah.
The game was sold out there at the home of the Charlotte Knights well before start time. I mean, I think it was like 11 a.m. They announced that it was a sellout. So you could just feel the energy build up throughout the day. And that dude delivered. His first pitch hit 99 miles per hour. He bumped 100 on the radar a handful of times. His slider's ridiculous. A lot of swings and misses. I mean, he's a guy that makes really good hitters look really, really foolish.
That I do recall being in the booth for that A&T Wake Forest baseball game. And actually, A&T was kind of hot at the beginning of the year. So we were kind of hyped having to come to Greensboro. But you could tell there was a huge gap in the pitching between Wake Forest and A&T. No disrespect to A&T, but Wake Forest, they just had like major league kids like out there like doing the thing.
Yeah.
And there was just a noticeable difference. In Raleigh, NC State hosting a regional. They've got South Carolina, James Madison, and Bryant in their bracket. Give me a guy from NC State that we should look for.
This guy is actually an ECU transfer. So he was a Pirate at this time last year, and he is literally the most experienced Division I college baseball player in the country. He leads in active players in games played. Alec Makarevich has been awesome for NC State this year in the heart of their order. He's a switch hitting third baseman. He's got as much pop from either side of the plate, which is unusual for a switch hitter at the college level. I think his home runs are literally split down the middle, half of them right-handed, half of them left-handed. Alec Makarevich has been good and a steady presence in what is I've described NC State's lineup as a really nice mixture of experience and youth, because they've got some guys who are younger, like a guy, Eli Serrano is their center fielder, who he started most of their games, if not all of them, as a freshman last year. And he's a sophomore who he plays up. He plays a little more like a junior, senior, upperclassman type guy because of the experience. It's a really nice mixture of talents and experience levels. I like their lineup a lot, and it's just been kind of Jekyll and Hyde. Some days they look like they could be one of the best offenses in the country, and other days it's, they'll struggle to get a hit. But as of late, it's been the former, and they've been really good.
So as we round that up, before I get you out of here, of course, I got to put you on the spot. Out of these North Carolina schools and these regionals, how many of them are you expecting to be moving on to the super regional round next weekend? For those that don't know, we didn't go through every single regional. The top 16 seeds get to host 14 double elimination brackets. That's from starting tomorrow through June 3rd. The 16 winners advance to the 8 matchup super regionals the following weekend. They'll be hosted by the higher seeded team. Out of these teams that we just went through, who are the teams that you expect to advance to the super regionals?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for a lot of them, because even the teams that are hosting, they got a 2 seed that's a really good SEC team. Right?
I was going to say, yeah, and it's baseball. Like I've learned this in high school baseball. Yeah, it's like the team can be like 20-1, and they get to the playoffs and they face some pitcher they just can't hit, and it's just over like that. And it's so final. And I've learned that baseball is a very cruel sport when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So, it can at any time. So that's why I was putting on the spot.
With that in mind, look, if it's ECU or Wake Forest, we know we're going to get a North Carolina team advancing to a super from the Greenville regional.
Right.
I like NC State's draw. South Carolina is a scary opponent, but they're beatable. And NC State, again, with the experience, especially in the pitching staff, is capable. I like, look, UNC Wilmington's the 2 seed in the Athens regional in Georgia. I like UNC Wilmington a lot to potentially upset the Bulldogs and advance from there. Clemson, I think, will win their regional. So we mentioned Coastal and High Point as being in that. North Carolina's got a good chance, but their 2 seed, again, is LSU, the defending champions, who sent a lot of talent to the professional ranks, but they have a lot more talent as they reloaded. I mean, they probably top to bottom on their roster have more pro prospects, legit pro prospects, than anybody in the field. So LSU is going to be tough. I like Duke. I've said from the beginning of the season, I think Duke is the most Omaha capable team in the state, in the ACC. And it's because of their bullpen. You know how in college football, a lot of the times you can just sort of commiserate and hashtag college kickers. It feels like this is the time of the year you could do the same thing with hashtag college bullpens. That's not a problem for Duke. That travels, and they hit it well. Also, it was a team that was going to have a lot of new faces in the lineup coming into the season, so we didn't know what to expect of them offensively. Next thing you know, they set up a program record for collective home runs in a season, so they can swing it too, in addition to having the good pitching. So I like Duke the most of any.
Of course, I'm rooting for Carolina to get there, and again, LSU is in their regional. And as we close this segment out, I gotta say, it feels like college baseball is the one quote unquote major sport in college athletics where you're prone to get teams like Wofford, Long Island University, High Point. Hell, Coastal Carolina just won it all not that long ago, correct? Like schools where, like, if you saw those names in college football, you would just like giggle and be like, oh, there's no shot. And even in college basketball, while it's kind of even the playing field a little bit with NIL and the transfer portal and everything else, it's still, there's a gap. But in college baseball, it feels like you can go to a Coastal Carolina or UNC Wilmington or Oral Roberts or, Bryant, these schools that you normally wouldn't hear in other sports, but in baseball, they're good programs, and they compete, and they have just as good of a chance to win as the Clemsons or the LSUs or, the Georgias of the world. So that's the thing for me that draws me into it around this time. And, I tell folks, my cousin Jerry Brooks played for Clemson in the 80s, the late 80s, and got drafted by the Dodgers. Actually played in Japan for a little while before he retired. So we actually got a chance to go down to Clemson numerous times, actually watch games. And I still remember as a kid when I don't know if it's still there because I haven't been there forever, but when you first get to Clemson, there's nothing there. It's literally just the school. And when you get there, it's like paw prints in the middle of the road instead of the yellow line or whatever. Are those still there? That was the one thing I remember driving into Clemson, South Carolina, and being at their ballpark, and got all the players to sign up my baseball and all that stuff. I mean, I'm like 9, 10 years old, something like that. So one of those memories from back in the day. But Daron's going to be super busy over the next couple of weeks. I'm sure you probably got someplace else to go and talk about this here in a little bit. So he's the host of ACC Baseball Etc the podcast. Find that on all major podcast platforms. And he's also the play-by-play for USA Baseball, amongst a bunch of other things. You're still doing the lottery thing too, aren't you?
Yeah, North Carolina education lottery drawings, once a week or so, something like that. Just
get it in, sir. I love it. I'll tell DG that you were on earlier because he's going to be on a little bit later on. It's a pleasure having you on, man. We'll definitely have you back on soon. It's Daron Vaught.
Cool. Appreciate you, Des.
Coming up, we'll have Matt Alquiza and Sam Dracula from the All Hornets Sports Illustrated crew. They'll come in. We'll talk a little NBA playoffs, and we'll talk about the Hornets. Who should they target at number 6 in the upcoming NBA draft? You're listening to Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio.
Franchise players are often referred to as the face of the franchise.
Welcome back into Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. Shout out to Daron Vaught stopping by, giving us a College World Series preview. There's 7 North Carolina schools in the College World Series. That'll start Friday. You can watch all of that action, I believe, on ESPN and their family of channels. David Glenn coming in just a little bit for the Sports Buffet. He's in every 2 weeks here on Franchise Players. But before we do that, it's an All Hornets Sports Illustrated takeover. Matt Alquiza and Sam Dracula in the house. And guys, I wanted to, before we get over to the Hornets and their draft pick, picking 6th overall, and I've kind of landed on who I think I might want them to pick. Let's start off in the NBA playoffs. We've kind of watched the changing of the guard really this postseason, where some of the main names that we normally see in May and June, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard when he's healthy, Paul George, all of them are gone. They were all gone by the end of the second round. And it's a new batch of players basically kind of leading us forward here in the NBA playoffs. I wanted to start off with Minnesota and Dallas. Minnesota and Dallas playing game 5 Thursday night. Minnesota down 3-1, trying to stave off elimination. What do you think are the keys for Minnesota staying alive, not just tonight, but this weekend? If they continue on, they'd be the only team to come back from a 3-0 deficit to move forward in the history of the NBA. What's the one key thing you think Minnesota needs to do in order to win? Because none of these games have been blowouts. They've all been really tightly contested games all the way through to the end.
Yeah, I mean, what led them to victory in Game 4 was the role players. I mean, not really role players. Karl Anthony Towns had that monster Game 4. I mean, that's it. He's the key to the series for me. Dallas doesn't really have a great person to match up with him. So yeah, if Cat can continue shooting like he did in Game 4, which is more in line with how he shoots for his career rather than how the first 3 games of the series went. I mean, that's how Minnesota stays in it for me. He's the main key for me for Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to throw in Ant just maintaining his composure as well. Some weird turnovers throughout the series and in the playoffs in general, but he's been super aggressive, and I wonder if it's a little bit of burnout going on with him. Obviously, he's never made it to this point in this type of high leverage situation. I'm rooting for him. It's exciting to see, like you mentioned, another star pop up. Like having non-sports fans ask me about Anthony Edwards is really awesome and makes me excited for the future of the league. But yeah, no, I agree with you with Kat. And I would say Ant being a little smarter out there.
Yeah, he's really avoided any criticism for his play down the stretch of some of these games, because there's 2 or 3 times he's just thrown the ball away in crunch time when it's been a tie game or Minnesota's been up by 1 or 2. I feel like I haven't really heard a ton of criticism for his play down the stretch of these games like you would hear for other superstars. It's been kind of interesting to me.
It feels like Cat's taking the brunt of that.
Yeah.
From doing, at one point he was like 4 from 32 from 3 or something like that. He got it going in game 4 at the end, and a lot of that felt like he just saw he just saw the ball going in the basket a couple of times because he was aggressive driving into the paint. He's like 7'3". Like I understand he's above 40% 3-point shooter, but it's the playoffs, man. You need to get in there and bang around. Like literally, you're the biggest player on the court for both sides, and like you're not even down there. You're just sitting in the corner waiting on a chance to shoot a 3, which is kind of indicative of like the whole league at this point. Where I saw an old clip of Kobe Bryant. It might have been right before he had passed, and he was on like some sort of interview show, and he was talking about how the NBA today plays accidental basketball, where basically it's drive and shoot or drive and kick pretty much to the open 3-point shooter or whatever, where he was like explaining how when he was with Phil Jackson and the Lakers, nothing they did was accidental. Like you're setting up this to set up that to set up this to get this person, this specific person open in the corner or whatever it might be. Whereas today it's just more drive into the paint and kick out. And there was a couple of times, I think in game 4 when I was watching it, where I'm like, no, it was in the Boston Indy series, I believe. I think it was TJ McConnell, where he gets all the way to the cup, and then as he spins and kicks it out, and you're like, you're 2 feet from the basket. Like they're not even thinking to shoot the basketball. They're thinking to kick it out for the 3. I understand 3 is more than 2, but at some point it gets ridiculous where it's just like, you got to pull away from shooting all these 3-point shots. Speaking of shooting 3-point shots, moving over to the other team in this, the Western Conference Final, the Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving have figured this out. They did not understand how to play with each other last year, ended up getting sat, and they kind of tanked the end of the regular season last year, got them Derek Lively, which kind of put them in the position where they are now. 2 questions. Is Doncic and Irving the best backcourt that you have seen the way they're playing right now? And how dangerous is Dallas?
I can't call them the best backcourt I've ever seen until they win a championship. I mean, it's Steph and Clay. I think, they have the belt for best backcourt of all time. Yeah. And they won 4 championships together. Until somebody can, reach that level of success. I mean, even like you think, Steph has 2 MVPs, one of them unanimous. Clay, top 5 3-point shooter of all time. Kyrie and Luka don't have that level of success quite yet. Give them a couple of years. Maybe they win the championship this year. Luka goes on to win a couple of MVPs, which I very much think he could. Then they could be in that conversation. But for right now, it's, Steph and Clay a step above everybody else when it comes to best backcourts of all time.
I'll throw in, since I'm the old head here, I'll throw in Magic Johnson and Byron Scott, but just saying.
Fair.
Sam.
No, yeah, it's got to be the Splash Brothers, just the run, the resume and the run they've had, and just impact. You talk about guys kicking out for 3s. Like, there's a reason all the kids grew up watching that, and you're seeing the effects of it in today's NBA when young guys coming into the league, this new version of basketball we're seeing.
That's a great point, actually. Just my rant there about how everybody's shooting 3s. It's because of the Splash Brothers.
Yeah, everyone can't jump like LeBron and MJ, but if you work hard enough, you can learn how to shoot it like Steph and Clay.
You could pass somebody that looks like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson in Walmart. Like, but if you if you pass somebody that looks like LeBron James, you're like, that's LeBron James. What's he doing in Walmart? You got the all Hornets Sports Illustrated crew in the house, Matt Alquiza and Sam Dracula. Here you can follow them at their handles on X here on the screen. Matt at Alquiza8 and Sam at Sam Dracula. You're listening to Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Do you cheer for PJ Washington when you see him in that corner hitting those 3s? Yeah. I'm like, good for you. You somehow leveled up somehow in the middle of the season. And that trade has been huge. Them getting Washington and having Gafford with Lively, like they have a front line now. And I'm seeing Doncic in particular, he likes to throw alley oops to those dudes. Like he'll get in the paint and just toss it up, and like there's a 7-footer grabbing it for a dunk. It's different from what I expected from Dallas, and I feel like honestly, Boston's gonna have some trouble with either one of these teams when they get to it, just because of the size. If Porzingis can't go, so we'll see what Porzingis is gonna have like going on 2 weeks before they have to play again. So maybe we see him. Let's go over to the Eastern Conference. Boston, of course, clinching over Indiana. People have talked about how Boston has had one of the easiest paths in the NBA Finals in history. I'm like, injuries happen in the NBA playoffs all the time. Literally, you could say Kawhi got that ring in Toronto because the Warriors got banged up in that series, or Isaiah Thomas sprained his ankle or whatever back in, was it 89 when the Lakers repeated or whatever. Like, there's different things that happen that are just part of the game, injury wise. But I'm looking at Jaylen Brown, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. One, I don't know, did either one of you notice that when he got awarded that award and the whole team is cheering him like, yay, Jason Tatum is nowhere to be found in that picture. I'm looking for him like, where's Tatum? And he's like way in the back, just kind of watching the whole thing go down. I understand why Brown got it, because he actually played better defense than Tatum did. He had some key defensive stops there at the very end of Game 4 that clinched it for them. Has he proven his worth to you yet? He's got the largest contract in the NBA, over $300 million over the next 5 years. You get paid $60 million a year, but it seems like he's the most underrated player in the entire league. Has he proven he's worth the money?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to live up to it, but you're paying to keep him. Because if you don't pay him, then like Philly with all their cap space, they're going to make a run at him and you're going to lose him. And just in today's NBA, you can't risk losing your homegrown guys.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're impossible to replace, because Boston's never going to be bad enough to draft another guy like that anytime soon, right? So you got to keep your guys, especially when they're all NBA level, like Jaylen Brown is. But no, yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. There was some weird stuff happening with, but I think it's all in the name of healthy competition. I
don't want to make it sound like that Jason Tatum like hates Jaylen Brown or anything like that. Like,
I hope they hate each other. I'll be fine. I'm here for that. I like internal beef. Bring back the beefs. Like Drake cooled down the Kendrick beef. Like, bring it back.
Literally though, it's crazy because Jason Tatum's like 25, but he's been in the league like 9 years. Yeah. So same with Brown. Like they've been there long enough where they were battling LeBron in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, literally, they've been there 8-9 years. They've been knocking on the door. This is the second time in 3 years they've made the Eastern Conference Finals. Matt, what do you think about Jaylen Brown? Has he arrived? He didn't even get nominated to an All-NBA team this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great basketball player. I mean, I always feel so weird about him because we've seen him like falter on the biggest stage. You know, the whole thing last year and the year before when they lost to the finals and the Warriors, last year when they lost to Miami. I mean, the whole narrative after the series was Jaylen Brown can't go left. Force Jaylen Brown left, and you see him, like dribble the ball off his foot or missing layups. But I mean, outside of that, he's a good basketball player. I'm not a huge fan of his. I don't know why him and Tatum have always just like rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not a huge Celtics guy. Those are not my favorite guys to root for. But yeah, he's a great basketball player, and Boston's a great team. I think last time I was on here, Des, you and I talked. I mean, Boston is, better than everybody else in the league. They're by far the best team in the East. We saw it as they ran through it. By far the best team in the league as a whole, record-wise. So yeah, I mean, Brown and Tatum have both arrived. I think it would be an upset if they don't win the championship at this point. I mean, they've arrived at the point where they are the best team in the league, arguably the best duo in the league. And, they're the championship favorites at this point.
And Tatum's going to get his $300+ million, I think, this offseason coming up here. So they're going to have two players making $600 million. I would like to think they'd like to have a ring to show for it going into it. So Boston, they were the best team in the league all year, 60+ win team, waiting the winner of Minnesota and Dallas. And they might know the answer to that by the end of this weekend. Again, no team has ever come back from being down 0-3 in an NBA series in NBA history. Minnesota trying to do that. Game 5 to Thursday night here on TNT at 8:30 p.m. Real quick before I get you guys out of here, the Charlotte Hornets picked at number 6 in the 2024 NBA draft. It's still kind of early, but I want to get your opinions on who you've narrowed down to at this point, because I'm sure both of you have kind of done your due diligence. You're kind of leaning towards a player. I'll save mine for last. Who do you guys want the Hornets to go after at 6 and why?
Well, it's good. It was so hard because you don't know how everything else is going to play out. But at this stage, I want Kling to fall at 6. I don't believe in the front court that we saw. I don't believe in Mark Williams yet. He's going into year 3 and he hasn't played 82 games yet. We don't know what he is. Yeah. He has 2 years left on his rookie deal, right? I'm not saying ship Mark Williams out of town, but I am saying move on from Nick Richards, who, bless his heart, tried his best, but was the worst starting center in the NBA last year. When you look at plus minus, dead last. And I think he's a good backup. He can help teams, like teams that need depth. He can help them out. But he's going to be 27 next year. By the time this team is good, he's going to be well over 30. I say if you can bring in another young center, a potential defensive anchor to help solidify things on the glass as well, because this team was the worst rebounding team in the NBA as well, and terrible on defense. So at least you can check those things off the list when you add Clingan to the mix. So that's who I'm hoping falls at this stage.
Matt?
Yeah, I'm one of the 3 college guys. I haven't done a ton of my due diligence on the G League or the international prospects, but I like Clingan. I think, we're looking at Dallas right now. They start Gafford and they bring Lively off the bench, and the little Twin Towers is really working for them. Same with Minnesota. You need size to win in the modern NBA. It went from the guard and wing game for a long time, but you look at Embiid and Jokic and Towns and what Dallas has going on. You need size in the modern NBA. It was going away from that for a while, but it is kind of back to being in vogue and important. So yeah, huge fan of Clingan. I like Stephon Castle. I think he'd be a good fit in Charlotte as a 2 guard next to LaMelo. He wants to play point guard, so he's not going to work out for Charlotte, it seems, and I think that might turn off a lot of teams for him, which, that's crazy to me. He's not the number 1 overall prospect. You can turn down workouts, pick your place. But I like his game.
Whoever's advising him,
and then
that's so bad, man. Like, it's such
it's crazy. It's
Bronny James route, right? It's like what Bronny's doing. Bronny's like, I don't need to work out with all these teams. Just the Suns and the Lakers will do. That'll be fine.
Yeah, if you're the bona fide number 1 prospect, you are on your way to Atlanta. I understand not working out for other teams, but Castle and Bronny, they need to work to get to earn their draft spot, whatever. But yeah, 3rd guy, Reed Shepherd. I think Reed Shepherd would be a good fit next to LaMelo as well. Good secondary ball handler, phenomenal shooter, can come off the bench for a while and lead the second unit. Him and Micic would have, they struggle defensively, but it would be fun to watch them run the offensive second unit. So yeah, one of those 3 guys is who I'm kind of honing in on at this point.
I'm with Clingan also. I like the idea, and I'm glad both of you guys that recognize the fact that the NBA has shifted back to size. Small ball, for the most part, only really worked with Golden State, and even with Golden State with small, but they had that depth lineup, but they also still had big men on the rotation that were helping out and doing their thing. So I like the idea of having Clingan and Williams, who, what I just read, should be good to go starting the season. He had a lingering back issues last year, but from all accounts, it's nothing that's going to be long term or anything like that. Because that was my concern. Because once you start messing up your back, it's kind of you're not going to be 100%.
It's funny though. Sorry to cut you off, but with Clingan, he had a bad foot injury. So like the 2 things you don't want your 7-footers to have: feet problems and back problems.
Back, yeah, that's probably not the ones that. But I really, honestly, I wanted Zach Edey, but at 6, it's too high. So I don't see them trading down. I don't see Edey in the 2nd round either. So I'm okay with Clingan. He'd be the next big man that I'd rather have.
And he's a winner.
And he's a winner. So I would love to have him. And then you kind of got a nucleus you can work around here in Charlotte. And to be honest, seeing Minnesota and OKC and the Knicks, some of these younger squads that we were in the lottery with just like 2 years ago or whatever, advancing with those core players from those draft picks as key components, it makes me have some hope for Charlotte. Now they have new ownership and they're going to have a new young coach who's actually going to be in the NBA Finals, and Charles Lee. It makes me feel hopeful. And every person I've asked outside of people that cover the Hornets, I'm like, do you think the Hornets core can be similar to what Minnesota's done or OKC? Like, no, it's the Hornets. I'm like, that's not really fair. That's not, I understand it, but that's not really fair. But with Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, if he returns as a free agent, it's a nice little young core to keep, especially in the Eastern Conference. Like, you can keep them together. None of them are older than 26, I don't believe. You can keep them together for 4 years and let them play, and actually they stay healthy. I think the Hornets could actually do something. But Connor Clingan would be my pick as well. Or I'm still on the whole, trade LaMelo Ball and like 4 first-rounders to Golden State for Steph Curry and just see what they say. Well, just call them, just see what they say.
Steph in the city.
Yeah. Bring Steph home. Bring him home. Like, he don't want to be in Golden State with Draymond anymore. But I got to get you guys out of here. Follow all of their work at @all_Hornets SI on X. And you can follow them individually at their X. X just sounds weird. I'm just gonna keep saying Twitter.
I call it Twitter. I'll just
call Twitter. At Alquiza 8 and at Sam Dracula on Twitter. You can catch them there. Thanks, guys, for coming through.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it.
Coming up, David Glenn will round us out here with the Sports Buffet. You're listening to Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio.
Franchise players are often referred to as the face of the franchise.
Welcome back to Franchise Players here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. Again, you can catch the audio version of this on terrestrial radio in the Triad on Friday afternoons while we're in season as we wrap up the 2023-24 season. Fridays, WWBG, 1470 AM at 5 p.m. in Greensboro, 6 p.m. WTOB, 980 AM, 96.7 FM in Winston-Salem. Shout out to Daron Vaught, who came through to talk about the College World Series and players to keep an eye out on. And the All Hornets Sports Illustrated crew, Matt Alquiza and Sam Dracula, stopping by to talk about the NBA playoffs and what Charlotte should do with that number 6 pick. Coming in, rounding third base, it's David Glenn. He's here every 2 weeks as part of the Sports Buffet, part of the North Carolina Sports Network, and host of the David Glenn Show, award-winning host, columnist, you name it. David Glenn in the house. What's going on, DG?
I'm doing great, Des. Always good to be with you, and always honored to be on any show that also includes one of my favorite people in the world, Daron Vaught.
We were joking about it because I only have really Daron comes on around baseball time with me because he's the one guy I'm like, okay, if I got baseball questions, I can ask Daron. And it just up for whatever reason, it always works out that Daron's on the same show that you're on. And for those that don't know, Daron was DG's last producer in Raleigh when he had the David Glenn Show on there. I think it was the largest syndicated sports talk show in the history of North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. So shout out to Daron. He's doing big things. And of course, DG's continuing to do big things on his own. I'm gonna hop right into the sports buffet because we got a limited amount of time left in the show. Let's go to baseball because it is baseball season. Let's start off with pro baseball. Major League Baseball integrating the Negro League stats into the all-time record books this week, which was a huge deal. It actually knocks a couple of big names out of top positions and gives them to Josh Gibson, who many people consider maybe the greatest baseball player of all time that never really got the full recognition he possibly deserved. Josh Gibson is now the all-time career leader in batting average at 372, ahead of Ty Cobb's 367, which is ridiculous. Gibson now leads Babe Ruth in career slugging percentage as well. And this is the one that people are talking about that I've come across is the home run record, because it's been not rumored, but talked about that Gibson had hit close to 800 home runs in his career. However, a lot of those were hit in like exhibition games and like semi-pro games and stuff. So it's a fuzzy record in terms of how many he actually hit. Who is your actual home run leader in your mind today? Because you have Babe, then you have the curious case of Barry Bonds, and now you're throwing Josh Gibson's name into it. And for me as a kid, it was always like there were certain sports records you knew as a kid. Like you knew who the heavyweight champion of the world was in boxing. You knew what the home run record was, like what was the career record, that 7:15 or whatever it was. You knew that number. You knew how fast the fastest man in the world was in the 100-meter. Like there were certain things you just kind of knew. And this is one of them. So I wanted to ask you, because I know you love baseball, in your mind, who is the actual home run leader and why?
Yeah, I'm happy to celebrate all of those guys, right, for different reasons. And anybody who wants to put an asterisk next to to Barry Bonds, it doesn't bother me because it's clear to me that he cheated against the rules of baseball at the time. But you know the deal here. And I was 5 years old reading historical baseball books. That's how deep in the weeds I get with this stuff. The reality is that all of those guys are legendary players. And the reality is that it is truly impossible to, with precision, compare era to era. For every time you want to kind of favor the old guys, there's something that favors the new guys. For example, in modern times, these guys are facing specialist relievers in the 7th inning, specialist relievers in the 8th inning, specialist relievers in the 9th inning. In the old days, you were usually facing a guy who was worn out by throwing 100 and some pitches by the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning. Times have changed. Equipment have changed. Even rules have changed to some degree. I'm just glad that after being neglected to a great degree, Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Buck Leonard, and many, many others from the Negro Leagues are finally getting more due. And I give a lot of credit to the 17-person committee, Des, that spent countless hours trying to separate what were real stats against real competition and what were not.
I can only imagine.
That's hard. That's hard to do when the data is 100 plus years old and was created before the internet.
Jeez. I can only imagine them sitting there trying to sift through like handwritten records, and you know what I mean? Like, just it's just crazy to think how big of a deal is this to include Negro League stats, because the one pushback I've seen from people online is that they don't necessarily understand the Hall of Fame. It's not the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, it's the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame. Just like the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. It's not just NFL players, it's, you know, all different types of pro leagues. And this is the same thing here with the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame. And I've seen people like, oh, well, they're erasing all these Major League Baseball records. They weren't MLB records. They're all-time records, like out of all pro baseball leagues. So how big of a deal is it to include these in here? Because you're talking about players like Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, you know, like guys that we've revered as legends, but almost like on a separate shelf because of segregation and everything that was happening at the time. We never got a chance to really see them play each other. And to his credit, from my understanding, Babe Ruth would actually in the offseason go barnstorming and go play against these Negro League teams and congregate with them. Like he played with them like as players, not as you know, individuals or whatnot. To you, how big of a deal is it to include these, and what do you think the impact might be going forward?
I think it's a big deal, and I'm glad it happened. You know, the reality is that there were about almost 30 years from the early 1920s to the end of the 1940s, almost 30 years of various leagues that they describe under, I think it was 7 different leagues under the Negro League's umbrella, if you want to call it that. And they found all these records. They only used, I think it was 75% of the records that they thought rose to the level of authentic enough to document as official statistics. The other 25%, they either couldn't match with actual box scores in the newspapers of the time. I mean, they dove into the archives. I can't emphasize as a journalist myself how much I admire the neck-deep research that these folks did, just to try to be fair to not only the players of that era, but also to the players whose numbers are going to be compared against them, right? So you know how it is, Des. We live in a country where a lot of people dislike change. And if they were told this guy led a category and now they're told this guy, some people can't deal with change. And
that's
they're
what I'm saying.
Automatically be against it. And man, if you add a race layer to the conversation, there's another percentage of Americans who completely lose their minds and become incapable of rational thought.
And that's kind of what I'm seeing. Like, oh my gosh, you were taking Ty Cobb away from, you know, oh, Babe Ruth is no longer this or that or whatever. And to your point about different eras and with bonds and the asterisk or whatnot, from my understanding, Babe Ruth was popping amphetamines and eating hot dogs right before he'd go out and hit 3 home runs in a game or whatever. So I mean, there's been different things throughout the game of baseball, especially me doing high school baseball now. I've learned that there's like unwritten rules of the game apparently that exist in baseball that don't exist in any other sport, that are just commonly kind of known. They're not exactly a rule, but it's just like everyone kind of does it. And I don't know. For me, all-time home run leader, I watched Barry Bonds do that stuff at the very end, the 72-run season and all that stuff. And everybody knew. Everybody knew he was on something. His head was twice the size it was when he was in Pittsburgh. Like, he was clearly on something. But I kind of give it to him still. The sad thing is, I don't know if he'll ever make this Hall of Fame that we're talking about because of everything that happened. Him and Mark McGwire, which is super. Sammy Sosa. I mean, that whole era should be recognized. It brought the league back from when they were on strike before. So I think they're still very important. I think over time maybe they get in, but I don't know for sure. Let's go down to College World Series. North Carolina is rich in college baseball talent and has been for quite some time. And I think the nation's starting to catch up on it. There's 7 North Carolina schools playing in the College World Series starting tomorrow. North Carolina, NC State, Duke, Wake Forest, High Point, Coastal Carolina, and ECU. Out of those 7, who is your bet? Who is your surest bet to make a super regional?
I would say it's the Tar Heels. I think the Heels are the best combination of pitching, batting, and fielding. And they had, I think it was 8 players on the All-ACC baseball team that was announced recently. And 4 of them were pitchers and 4 of them were field players. So there shows some balance for you. Obviously, in college baseball, being a high seed matters a lot. If you're a top 16 seed, you host your regional, right? The Tar Heels were 32-2 at Boshamer Stadium this season in Chapel Hill.
How many games did they play? I saw that.
Barely above 500 on the road. To anybody who doesn't think playing at home matters, 32-2 is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And for a quick analogy, everybody in our state loves college basketball. These tournaments are roughly the same size, okay? 64 teams for baseball, 68 for men's basketball. The most teams our state has ever gotten into what we call the big dance in men's basketball is 6 in a single year. And it's only been done twice. Most recently, 2018, we got 6 in as a state. The 8 that we got in last year to baseball's tournament as a state was the most in the nation. The 7 you mentioned this year, the most in the nation. And when you combine the two numbers, 15 over the last 2 years, no other state has more than 10.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, and there's great baseball states like Texas and California and Louisiana and Florida, much more populous states than ours in most cases. So the fact that we have 18 Division I baseball programs in North Carolina, and it was 8 last year, 7 this year, some of them are repeats, right? I mean, Duke and Wake and Carolina and State and ECU are in a lot almost every year. But still, the quality and depth has never been better in the history of our state in college baseball. I think State, ECU, and Carolina all have a great chance to advance because they're all at home this weekend. And who knows beyond that, man? I wouldn't want to play Duke or Wake either. Those are really good baseball teams.
I saw Wake early this year. They played North Carolina A&T, and of course, Tobacco Road's the production partner for A&T Athletics. So we chose to do that game. It was early in the year. A&T was actually pretty hot to start the season off. So we were really looking forward to the matchup. And it didn't take long before we realized that Wake Forest was just like here. They're at a whole different level of pitching. And that it got to like 8-1 or something real
Chase
quick.
Burns.
Yeah. He's a problem. And when I was talking to Daron about this earlier on in the show, he mentioned, of course, Coastal Carolina won the College World Series not that long ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And Wake was in the College World Series final against LSU just last year. So seeing teams like High Point or Coastal Carolina, or actually I think I left UNC Wilmington off of this list, and they're actually in it too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, UNCW.
Yeah. So seeing those in there for baseball, and we see it every year, it's weird if you don't follow college baseball like that, and you come in and you're like, oh, what is this school doing here, that school, when they're like perennial like baseball powerhouses, but they don't play football or they're not at the same level at basketball or whatever. So it's a different kind of 64 that you're seeing. And it's cool to me to see it spread out across these other schools where you can go to a High Point University and get to the College World Series playoffs and maybe get to a super regional or whatnot. You don't have to go to a big school. Real quick though, before I get you out of here, turning our sights to college basketball and the transfer portal, the deadline to declare for the NBA ended. Some players kind of left out in the wind here. Some decided to go back. Hunter Salas is going back to Wake Forest, we found out. Ingram is leaving UNC. We kind of knew he was going to do that as he started getting graded in the first round. The Duke guys are gone. Caleb Love going back to Arizona, which I thought was pretty ironic considering RJ Davis made that decision about a month prior to come back to UNC. How much has that 5th year COVID year affected college basketball in your opinion? And I thought I saw something, it might have been you that told me that they're actually considering making it permanent and making it where you can go for 5 years or whatnot. What have you heard about that, and how much do you think it's affected college basketball since 2020?
I think it's huge because college basketball has never been older. That's the bottom line. And freshmen coming out of high school have smaller impacts than they used to. And transfers and name, image, likeness money. These are all mostly relatively new things. NIL money we've only had for 3 years. Immediate eligibility for all transfers we've only had for a very brief time. And it has made college basketball older, and it has impacted even these early NBA draft decisions because RJ Davis didn't like where his projection was in the draft. Great college player, All-American, ACC Player of the Year, but the NBA is not drooling over RJ Davis, who's a 6-foot-tall guard, right? So he just says, I'll stay in Chapel Hill. And like Armando Bacot a year ago, a 5th-year senior, made more money as a 5th-year senior for the Tar Heels, Bacot did, than he will this coming year as a professional basketball player somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the rules are different, literally, and the mentality is different. And you mentioned the guys who left Duke. That's the old-fashioned way, right? Jared McCain and Kyle Filipowski know they're going to be first-round draft picks. Most guys who know they're going to be first-rounders go. but there were a lot of on the fence guys, and some of them waited to the end. And I think Hunter Salas staying at Wake gives the Deacs their best chance of an NCAA tournament team in the Steve Forbes era, which is going into year 5. And meanwhile, a couple guys who pulled out did stay in college, but they left their ACC schools. So Florida State's losing Jameer Watkins to another university. Miami is losing Norchad Omier and Wooga Poplar to other schools. So they stayed in college, but they're transferring, and they're on the NBA radar. So these decisions have gone in all different directions. I think I followed 32 guys in our coverage at ncsportsnetwork.com.
Gosh, it's like the Wild Wild West. And like, speaking of Steve Forbes, he's built his team through the portal since he got to Wake. So he's in the middle of doing that. And I know Cam Hildreth's coming back as well. Wake, I think, finished 5th in the ACC this past regular season. So this could be the best opportunity for Forbes to get over that hump and finally get into the NCAA tournament. And Carolina and Duke is just, the usual. We'll see how their roster shape up as we get closer to that. Follow DG on Twitter/X at David Glenn Show. And make sure you rate and subscribe to the NC Sports Network over on YouTube. It is Mr. David Glenn. Appreciate having you on, man.
Great to be with you, Des. Keep up the good work.
And that'll end it for franchise players for the week ending Thursday, May the 30th, 2024. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Have a good one.